Good morning. Welcome to the STS-79 post-landing press conference. With us this morning, we have Tommy Holloway, the shuttle program manager. Joining him is Frank Culbertson, the NASA Phase 1 program director, and also Linda Ham, the STS-79 entry flight director. We'll have a statement from all three individuals and then take your questions. Tommy?
Good morning. Well, Shannon is back and John is on board the Mir, and we've just completed the historic STS-79 flight. I'll let Frank talk about the details of Shannon and John and the accomplishments of the Mir objectives. From a shuttle perspective, the STS-79 was an outstanding flight. It continues to demonstrate the robustness of the overall shuttle system and our ability to adapt when we have problems along the way. This is the fifth time we've rendezvoused with the Mir, the fourth time that we've docked with the Mir. The overall systems worked extremely well. The docking system for the fourth time worked flawlessly. The rendezvous operations and tools continue to mature and are working in an exceptional way. We are continuing to evolve the overall shuttle operational systems and accomplishing DTOs on GPS and a wraparound DAP that will be phased into the shuttle system later, that will provide a more robust system, a safer system, and additional flexibilities. I was particularly pleased with the manner in which the flight team and the engineering team reviewed the APU problem that we had post-ascent and prepared the information. They not only reviewed all of the options for the failure mode of that APU, but determined the health and welfare of the overall shuttle systems at that point, and enabled us to press on and accomplish the 79 mission objectives. I was very pleased with the overall robustness of the system and how quickly we were able to accomplish that review. In the post-flight processing down in Florida, we are at this point, we have the nozzles off of the boosters, and one of the motors has been disassembled. The fuel joints that we incurred the observation on STS-78 on the one motor that we have apart is normal, and we'll be disassembling the second motor today. On the interface between the nozzle and the motor, the situation where we've had gas pass before, those were both normal with no gas pass. We did experience a new observation in one of the nozzles, the right nozzle on this flight, and I'll describe it very briefly for you. Of course, you all are familiar with what a nozzle looks like, but on the outside, but on the inside, it looks like this, with the flow being in this direction, with carbon phenolic built up at various thicknesses as we go from the inside of the motor to the exit in the nozzle. The thickness of the carbon below the carbon phenolic is glass phenolic, and the thickness of the carbon varies as required to maintain the thermal margins in the overall system. On this particular flight, in one nozzle, we observe what we've been calling furrows or trenches in a number of places around the nozzle, and they range from very narrow to approximately a little less than a half an inch deep. Some 60 of these scattered around the circumference of the nozzle. They start just above this joint, 2 to 4 inches above this joint where the phenolic is fairly thick, and go from a few inches to up to maybe 15 or 16 inches down the throat, down the nozzle. And the depth is thicker, the erosion is thicker up where the carbon phenolic is thicker, and gets shallower as it goes toward the back of the nozzle. At this time, we do not have any indication of what may have caused this particular situation. We've expedited the shipping of both nozzles to Utah. They arrived at Clearfield on Wednesday of this week, and they're in the process of now being inspected and disassembled, and we'll later very carefully look at the phenomena and measure and dissect and so on and so forth. As I said, that currently there are no indications of what may have caused this problem. Of course, as usual, we've established a team at THICAL that will be working to understand and project what this might mean to us. And in parallel to that, we've established an independent government team that will, at the Marshall Space Flight Center, augmented by other people around the agency to support them to concurrently evaluate the situation. Currently, we are proceeding with the preparation for launch of STS-80. Our current launch date is November the 8th. The last time I talked to you, I believe we were still on October the 31st. We slipped to the 8th primarily due to the overall flow of the boosters. As you remember, we destacked the boosters, had to roll our MPLM, our carrier, out of the OPF for a hurricane, and so rather than be rushed in the preparation of the boosters, we determined that it would be best to wait till November the 8th. Currently, STS-81 is projected to be launched on January the 14th. So at this point, we're on schedule for those flights, and looking forward to their launch and being back to Frank's flight in January. Frank?
Thanks, Tommy. Good morning, and as you can imagine, everyone in the Shuttle Mir program on both sides is very excited and very happy. I talked to Shannon just a little while ago, and she sounded just the way she did on orbit. Very happy to be doing what she's doing, but also very happy to be back down on Earth and looking forward to seeing her family very soon. She said that it was a great adventure. She was very proud of the way it went and very happy with the support she got from the ground, and especially wanted to thank her ops lead, Bill Gerstenmaier, who spent a lot of time in Russia to make sure that her program continued flowing and that she was supported and her questions were answered. So they were a good team working together. The docs say that she is in really good health, that there are no surprises, and they expect the rehabilitation to go normal. And we'll probably hear more from them a little bit later in the day. The Phase 1 portion of the mission, the shuttle mission, we think was very successful. The shuttle, of course, supported us very well and operated extremely well. We transferred approximately 3,400 pounds of hardware to the Mir, brought back about 2,300 pounds, and that will be unloaded at the Cape, of course, from the middeck and the space hab. We also transferred over 2,000 pounds of water to the Mir, which they've already begun using, both potable and technical water for their oxygen generation system. And we transferred some oxygen, nitrogen, and to the Mir as we normally do, about the normal amount. The Mir operations are going very well. John has jumped right into his program and is very busy with it. In fact, he'll probably be glad when the weekend gets here, because I think he's had very little time to sit back and reflect, because he's been getting things up to speed on his program, getting computers configured, and checking out his experiments. So he's very busy, as we hear from the Mir. The Mir itself is operating well. And the feedback we got from our team in the Mir is that the Russians came in to congratulate us on the safe return of Shannon, and to tell us how happy they have been working with her, and feel like she represented both programs very well. So we're glad to see Shannon back. We're looking forward to welcoming her home tomorrow. We expect the homecoming to be at Ellington tomorrow afternoon, and expect a pretty large crowd. I talked to Bill Reedy, who also said he thought Shannon was in great shape, and of course was very happy to be back, and wanted to also thank the team for the support of the flight, and thought it was a terrific team effort between the folks in flight and on the ground to get all the transfers done and execute the mission. So we're happy to be where we are. We're looking forward to a good mission for John, and continuing to use the shuttle as it does so well, take people and cargo to orbit, and return them safely. Thank you.
Linda?
An excellent way to end a near-perfect flight would be to land at the KSC shuttle landing facility on the first opportunity, and we were able to do that today. The weather did cooperate. We, of course, were working weather during the deorbit prep and entry phase. We were looking at some scattered clouds that were off the coast of Florida at about 4,000 feet. So we did look at those and were concerned whether they would go broken. It did say scattered. We had a go forecast and we had a go observation at landing time. Crosswinds were within limits, including the placards that we had in place in case we did get down to a single APU. So everything went real well with the weather. The other thing that we had worked during the deorbit prep was a runway analysis, making the trades between whether we wanted to go to KSC 1.5 versus 3.3. Initially, we were looking at going to 3.3 because we had a smaller hack turn and no sun glare for the commander, but we did have a large speed break. So you might have noticed that after the deorbit bird, we did change runways. We selected KC 1.5 where we did land with a bigger hack turn, 340 degrees, but as you saw, we had a good landing and there was no issue with that. We had a pretty clean entry. We only had a couple small failures, both occurring post-landing. One was a transducer on a water spray boiler on System 3. It was a quantity pressure transducer, actually, that was intermittent post-landing the last time we flew this vehicle on STS-76 and intermittent again this flight. And the other thing we had post-wheel stop was APU 3 turbine speed. One of 3 magnetic pickup units went down to 17% and then back up showing normal speed. But that was for only one sample, so it was 1/10 of a second that it did this, and we're not sure whether it was maybe a data hit or maybe the MPU itself. All 3 of the APUs will be removed after this flight because of the time on the system, so it's no impact to the post-landing turnaround. And that's all I had to add. It really was an excellent deorbit prep and entry, and systems operated real well on the orbiter.
Okay, well, we'll start here at JSC with questions. Mark?
This is Mark Carreau of the Houston Chronicle. I have a question and a follow-up, please, for Frank Culbertson. Could you comment on Shannon, just how she sounded? Did she sound tired to you, which I gather would be possibly a normal response after all this? Or was she strong and ready to go for the day, or what?
Well, actually, I expected her to sound tired too, but even when I was talking to Bill, I could hear her laughing in the background, which is pretty normal for Shannon. And when she got on the phone, she sounded as excited and bubbly as ever, and ready to get going with the day and go see her friends and family. And she sounded totally up. I suspect she was probably lying down at the time, but she sounded really, really good.
Mark, you have a follow-up?
Yes, this question may be a little tougher to answer succinctly, but I guess you could say you're almost right at the halfway point with the shuttle mirror program. And I wonder if you might be able to sort of evaluate the major steps you think it's taken to this point and those you still want to take before you feel that the program is ready to go to the Phase 2 or assembly portion of a new space station.
Well, you're right, Mark. That is hard to answer briefly, but actually we've only completed 2 of the 7 missions we have currently planned, so we've got a ways to go. In calendar time, I suppose, depending on when you start counting, we are about halfway. There's really no requirement to reach a certain point in Phase 1 before we start Phase 2. We will just continue with Phase 1 as planned, continuing to look for opportunities to evaluate either risk mitigation experiments or new operational procedures or whatever to help us in Phase 2. But Phase 2 will continue as scheduled, and they will continue to do their work, building on what we've done as best they can, but also having to keep to their own schedule and meeting their own milestones. I think that we've accomplished the major portion of the objectives that we've set out to this point, particularly learning to work with each other, evaluating risk mitigation, conducting long-duration studies on humans in orbit, and conducting the science and research program. So we're meeting those objectives. We'll continue to do so in the future. And what I would like to see as we go further down the road is increased efficiency in our operations, better cooperation and ability to certify payloads for orbit and to test them for use on orbit, and simplification of our processes on both sides so that we can spend less time on the paperwork and more time on the operations. But we think we're moving in that direction. The Russians are motivated to do the same thing, and we think that we'll be able to carry those efficiencies over into Phase 2.
Okay, any other questions here? If not, then we'll switch now to the Kennedy Space Center, and we'll take questions from that location.
Frank, can you hear me? This is Jay Barbary with NBC. Could you tell us how Shannon left the shuttle to the transporter? Was she wheeled off by the gurney as advertised? Did she walk on her own, or was she assisted by Dr. Johnson or anyone?
Jay, I don't have a report on that. All I was told was that everything was as expected after landing, so I assume they went per the plan.
Would you assume right now that she was reclining on the gurney and was rolled in off to the transporter on the gurney?
I suppose you could assume that, but before you write that down, I'd wait and ask somebody who was there.
It's Craig Cavalt with Aviation Week, with one for Tommy and one for Linda. It'd be Tommy, on the furrows for the solid rocket motors. Is there any way to kind of, at least in a qualitative manner, characterize the potential for delaying the next flight at this time?
Craig, I think it's too early to speculate on that. Of course, as usual, when we have an observation such as this, we need to understand it and understand how it might expand and become a larger problem. So all of that work's going on. Currently, it appears that there were significant margin left in the nozzle, and of course that remains to be seen as we do the detailed evaluation and look at the phenolic all along the furrows. You need to wait about 2 to 3 weeks, and we will answer that question.
Okay, and a reentry question for Linda. Linda, as far as you know, did all the PTIs cycle? And can you just characterize the amount of change in role that each one was going after?
Yes, we had 5 PTI scheduled. We believe all 5 of them did execute. PTI number 3, we had some data dropouts while it happened, but we're pretty sure that it did occur. And I believe the rate was 5 degrees per second out to about 20 degrees, first with the wrap DAP and then rolling back with the standard DAP, and it all looked nominal.
Tommy, this is Seth Borenstein from the Orlando Sentinel. Going back to the furrows, I know you say you don't know what caused it. Do you have some suspect? How many suspects do you have right now? And I have a follow.
Currently, we have 0 suspects, absolutely 0. The work is going on. We have no known deltas to the processing or the procedures, no known changes that might have caused this particular situation. So at the current time, we have no indications of what may have caused it.
I know you said it'd be about 2 or 3 weeks. Looking at this compared and adding on the wrench that was found, is this an indication, especially with the wrench, is that an indication once again of the morale problem here? And does that worry you more than the furrows because it's a human error type of thing, or does it worry you less because it's human error?
Well, first of all, the wrench that was inside the forward skirt of a solid rocket booster system was apparently left there by an entirely different organization than the motor, than the people who build a motor. Also, an entirely different organization of people who do the primary processing and stacking of the system to get it ready to go fly. I don't see any correlation between any of the events that are going on in the program, like the wrench being left in the forward skirt and other observations that we've had. As far as the degree of the problem, the wrench itself being left in the forward skirt in of itself in our evaluation was not a safety threat or a threat to the booster in any way. It was a very light wrench, as you know, a 5-inch standard wrench like you might find in your garage, weighs approximately 2 ounces. The LRUs that's in the forward skirt are very robust. The cables are well protected, and so it would be hard to imagine that would be a real problem. However, we do have procedures and plans in which that should protect against such an event, and in other circumstances, leaving a tool or an article in somewhere where it should not be might be a problem. And along that line, we're taking the wrench situation very serious, and we have a team headed by USBI working that situation. They'll make a recommendation to either strengthen the current procedures that we have in their operation, or put in place some additional procedures. So I don't really believe the wrench was a threat to safety, and of course at this time, as I said earlier, I really don't know for what the threat might be in terms of the nozzle, and when that information comes in, we'll make the right determination.
This is Sue Butler for the AP. First, for Frank Culbertson. We understand that Frito-Lay has offered Shannon Lucis the whole cage of Frito-Lays, and will she be allowed to accept him as a government employee? And the same would go for if M&M offers her a whole truckload.
I had not heard that, Sue, and that's a very interesting proposal. I suppose if it comes in, we'll have to evaluate it, whether a government employee is allowed to receive gifts of M&Ms or not.
And I assume, besides talking with her and that she was chipper, did you talk with the doctor? Did he say she was pale, puny, rosy-cheeked, or what? And we know she's happy, but besides that, how does she look?
A chance to see her, and I didn't talk to the doctor who was with her.
Thank you. And I have a question for Tommy. On the USBI procedures and the wrench and all this, do you feel this reflects worker morale? Maybe they're worried about the transition to United Space Alliance. Do you feel that they're preoccupied with hanging on to their jobs, and that's why they get sloppy?
Well, first, I don't think the USBI employees that prepare the forward skirt at this time should be threatened by U.S. Alliance. And secondly, I think this will turn out to be an isolated incident that even though it might be an escape in terms of our in-place procedure, in no way reflects on the morale or the overall competence of the people doing the work. So the answer to your question is no.
This is Irene Brown with UPI. I have a quick question for Tommy about the nozzle. Just to clarify, did you say that the issue would need to be resolved like before the 80's flight readiness review?
Certainly it will need to be resolved before we fly STS-80. It's not absolutely mandatory that we resolve it before the FRR. There might still be open work being pursued at the time of the FRR, and depending upon the magnitude of that work and the direction that we're going at that time, we might proceed with the FRR with the open items on the nozzle and continue to close those as we approach launch. Certainly my target will be to make a decision that's straightforward and clean by the time we have the FRR.
Thank you. And my other question is to do with Shannon. I'm not sure if you know this or not. Do you know how long the doctors are going to be staying with her, and is this like a physician that's going to be like actually in the house with the Lucids, or just outside on call, or just available on a beeper or something?
Well, there'll certainly be flight surgeons available on beeper for as long as she needs them and wants them. There will be a doctor with her constantly for the first several hours after she has landed, and we suspect probably for a day or two at least nearby. And that'll be a call they'll have to make as they evaluate her condition, which, as we said, sounds very good.
Shannon going to be able to go home Friday night, or does she need to stay at Johnson overnight, or does that just depend on how she feels?
That depends on how she feels and how the doctors evaluate her condition.
Bill Harwood, CBS News. Two for Tommy Holloway on the nozzle issue. I guess there were 5 instances of troughing like this in the past, to a much lesser degree. What did you guys ever decide caused it in the past when you saw similar troughs?
Well, Bill, you're correct in that there's been previous situations where something similar to what we have observed on 79 occurred in the nozzle. At this time, I have not reviewed the results of the work that was done on those flights in detail, and so I'm really not prepared to answer your question.
For me, I guess on the right side booster there was a pressure spike on this rocket, and I'm just wondering if anybody, I realize you're not speculating at this point as what could have caused it, but could you not have had some slag coming out of there in a one-time only sort of deal from the mix and dug some troughs in the nozzle insulation?
Well, I wouldn't speculate at this time. I suppose you could have had some slag come out, but I'm not prepared to really talk about that at this time. And there's no indication at this time that that might have been the problem.
This is Stephen Young with Reuters. Are you planning to do a hot fire of all 3 auxiliary power units on Columbia just to make sure they're okay? And if so, are you concerned that there might be some kind of flaw that caused the shutdown at the beginning of this flight?
Well, I will talk about the APU a little bit. First of all, as I indicated earlier, we have conducted a detailed analysis based on the data that we had and the symptoms of the shutdown and the manner in which the APU shut down, and have isolated it to a possible 4 failures. Most, 2 of which were wire breakage and 2 which had to do with controllers or sensor failures. 2 of those cases would have required 2 failures to cause the APU shutdown, and all of the faults dealt with controllers and wires to the shutoff valve, or the shutoff valve itself, and the way it's mechanized and the way it's controlled electrically. In no way do we believe the fault had anything to do with the hydrazine or the flow of the hydrazine or blockage or any of those kind of operations. We have put in place tests and have already executed tests on the STS-80 APUs that confirm that we have continuity in all the circuits, and that the APUs in the STS-80 vehicle are at this time pristine. So we're very confident in the 80 APUs based on what we know today. Additionally, we have put plans in place to do diagnostics on the APU number 2 in Atlantis, and those will be accomplished as early as Monday or Tuesday of next week, in which we expect to find out very explicitly where the failure was, and if it ends up being what we think it is, and there's no reason to believe one of the 4 that we think it might be, there's no reason to believe it will not be. At the current time, since this was not a fluids problem, no reason to believe it is, I anticipate that it would not be productive to do a hot fire.
Chen Earthens, let me follow up on that, probably for Linda though. What made you so confident or certain that the APU-2 was in bad enough a shape that you didn't even want to think about starting it up, just leaving it as an emergency back pocket if you had another APU failure?
Okay, well, there were 2 reasons why we didn't want to restart APU-2, and the first was the fact that we really didn't think it would restart. We felt like the thing was failed, that the shutoff valve wasn't going to open, so we had no confidence in in that APU working. And we were more than willing to try it for a second if we needed to later in the flight at Tame. The other reason was one of the things that could have caused the broken wire that Tommy was alluding to was a small chance of the failure mode such that fuel got into the housing where those coils are that power the valve. And if it did get in there, they could have had a reaction with the fuel and the coil, and could have, which would have caused a rupture of the wire, and also maybe the housing that contains those coils would have expanded some. And we just didn't want to we didn't want to do that again. Put the potential for an ignition source there with Hydrazine.
And for Tommy, how different will the investigation board makeup be for the two SRB incidents this time versus, say, for STS-56 and 93, when you also had a tool that was accidentally left in a booster during launch?
I understood your question to be how did the boards compare between the various events that we've had in the booster over the last several months or year or so. I think it would be very similar. We have THICOL is doing its normal work, and it has its normal team assessing this, and we also have a government team predominantly staffed by the Marshall Space Flight Center, although the chairman and are independent from the project office that manages the solid rocket motor, and the participants are individuals that do not work day to day on the motor. It's augmented by additional people around the agency, and in that sense, it's very similar to what we've done in the past.
With the transition going to single prime now, will the contractor or USA or whoever have more responsibility than they would have in the past?
Relative to the motor?
Boards, will there be a different chair of the board or different priorities as far as who's going to make the decisions, as far as which way to go, solutions, whatever?
Well, first of all, with the prime contractor coming on board, the 1st of October will not change the relationship between the government and how we manage a solid rocket motor at all. Solid rocket motor is not part of the prime contractor's work at this point in our implementation of the SFOC contract. So he has no responsibilities in that regard, and the decision relative to the solid rocket motor will continue to be made by the project manager at Marshall and the program manager in Houston, the government.
Okay, I understand that's the last question at KSC. We don't have any questions at the other centers. We're going to conclude this press conference now and be switching the satellite back to KSC for a press conference with NASA Administrator Dan Golden. That will be carried on NASA television. However, the question and answer will only be from KSC. So that should be come up here in just the next couple of minutes. And one last programming note, the crew press conference should be happening somewhere in the 5 to 6 hours after landing time frame on NASA television as well. Thank you very much.